Lord, give me strength. That's what I mutter every morning when I settle onto my porch with my Earl Grey. The aroma of bergamot is usually enough to soothe my soul, especially after wrestling with my arthritis to get out of bed. But this particular Tuesday, even the Earl Grey couldn't cut through the tension crackling in the air. You know that feeling, sweetie, when the world feels just a little off? I live in a perfectly pleasant little cul-de-sac here in Atlanta. Nice, quiet, respectable. Mostly folks on a fixed income, enjoying their golden years. Or at least trying to. Me, well, I'm trying to enjoy mine. After losing George, my husband of 48 years, bless his heart, peace and quiet became my greatest desires. Didn't want any drama, just wanted to putter in my garden, read a good book, and maybe watch a little Matlock in the evenings. But life, as they say, has a funny way of laughing in your face. And this particular morning, life was laughing in the form of my daughter-in-law, Bethany, and my neighbor, Jerry. Bethany, bless her heart, is a whirlwind. She's a good woman, I truly believe that, married to my son, Michael, for 5 years now, and given me 2 beautiful grandchildren, Lily and Tom. She works in marketing, some fancy social media job downtown, always dressed to the nines, even on casual Fridays, if you catch my drift. A bit modern for an old gal like me, but I admire her drive. Anyway, there she was, standing near the azaleas in the front yard, glued to her iPhone. Now, I'm not one to eavesdrop, honey, but her voice carried. It was low, almost a whisper, and she kept glancing around like she was expecting someone to jump out from behind the rhododendrons. "No, I told you, I can't meet then," she hissed into the phone. "Michael will be home, and Helen, well, she's always around." She paused, listening. I busied myself with my tea, pretending to admire the petunias. "Look, I'll figure something out," she continued, her voice laced with frustration. Just don't call me at home again, okay? Use the other number." The other number? My ears perked up, I can tell you that. Bethany has always been an open book, or so I thought. What need did she have for a secret phone? Now, I know, a lot of young people have 2 phones these days, one for work, one for personal, but this felt different, sneaky. She ended the call with a curt goodbye and shoved her phone into her purse. She didn't see me on the porch, thank heavens. She walked back into the house, her shoulders slumped slightly, like she was carrying the weight of the world on her young back. I frowned. I didn't like the look of that at all. Just as I was about to take another sip of my tea and ponder this new development, that infernal sound shattered the morning tranquility. Jerry Henderson, my neighbor to the left. A retired accountant himself, and a man who took meticulousness to a whole new level, and apparently a man who considered 7 a.m. an acceptable time to mow his lawn. Now, Jerry's lawn is his pride and joy. It's perfectly manicured, a putting green of verdant perfection. He treats it like his 4th child, I swear. But the man is obsessed, and always at the most inconvenient times. Especially when I want to enjoy my tea and the rare quiet moment. He was pushing his John Deere mower back and forth across his yard with the grim determination of a man on a mission. The smell of freshly cut grass filled the air, mingling with the bergamot of my tea in a most unpleasant way. I sighed. The mower drowned out everything. Any chance of hearing anything more from Bethany's clandestine phone call was gone. I glared at Jerry, but he was too engrossed in his task to notice. He was wearing his usual uniform, khaki shorts pulled up way too high, a white polo shirt tucked in with military precision, and those awful thick-rimmed glasses that magnified his eyes to the size of saucers. Honestly, the man was a menace. Not a malicious menace, mind you, just a constant, low-grade irritation, like a pebble in your shoe. He made another pass, closer to the property line, and I swear he revved the engine just a little louder. He knew I was out here. He had to. Bethany reappeared in the doorway, looking flustered. She glanced at Jerry, then back at the phone in her hand. She seemed about to make another call, but Jerry's mower was too loud. She retreated back inside, defeated. I watched her go, my mind racing. What secrets was Bethany hiding? And why does Jerry always mow at the worst times? I didn't like the way she scurried back inside, like a mouse running from a cat. She was up to something. I could feel it in my bones. The same bones that ache every morning, mind you, but still reliable when it comes to sensing trouble. A few minutes later, she reappeared, all smiles and sunshine. Too much sunshine, if you ask me. "Everything all right, honey?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I took another sip of my now tepid Earl Grey. She gave me that practiced, innocent look of hers, the one that probably worked wonders on my son Michael, but I wasn't Michael. "Oh, just a wrong number, Helen," she chirped, waving her hand dismissively. "Some telemarketer trying to sell me. I don't even know what. They mumbled something about solar panels. You know how they are." Solar panels? In this neighborhood? Honey, everyone here is on a fixed income. We're not exactly prime candidates for green energy initiatives. And even if we were, we'd be suspicious of some young buck trying to sell us snake oil. No, that didn't ring true. Not one bit. I narrowed my eyes. Solar panels, huh? Seems like everyone's trying to get a piece of the pie these days. I left the question hanging in the air, bait on a hook. Bethany just smiled, a little too brightly. Exactly, they're relentless. Anyway, I should get back inside. I'm working on a new recipe, trying to impress Michael, you know. She patted my arm, a gesture that felt more like a dismissal than affection, and turned to go. But then she hesitated. She glanced over at Jerry, still meticulously mowing his lawn, then back at me. A flicker of something crossed her face. Fear? Annoyance? I couldn't quite place it. "That Jerry," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. "He's always mowing, isn't he? You'd think he had nothing better to do." And then she was gone, disappearing back into the cool darkness of the house, leaving me sitting there with my lukewarm tea and a whole lot of unanswered questions. Bullshit, that's what it was. A load of utter and complete bullshit. Solar panels? Please. Back in my day, we knew a lie when we heard one, and Bethany was lying through her teeth. I might be getting on in years, but my mind is still sharp. I was a damn good accountant for 30 years, and you don't get that far by being gullible, sweetie. And that glance at Jerry, that was the key. I knew it. What was going on between them? Did they even know each other? She acted like he was just some annoying neighbor, but there was something else there, simmering beneath the surface. I watched Jerry as he made another pass with his mower, the roar of the engine a constant, irritating drone. He was deliberately mowing closer to my property line now, I was sure of it. The man had the subtlety of a rhinoceros, always with the lawn, the fertilizer, the weed killer, the edging. He even has a little machine that paints the lines on the grass to make it look like a baseball field. I swear, it was like living next to a golf course groundskeeper. And the noise was enough to drive a saint to drink. My arthritis was acting up, a dull throbbing in my fingers that mirrored the growing unease in my gut. I reached for my cane, the familiar weight comforting in my hand. Maybe I was just being an old busybody. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Bethany's phone, the hushed tone, the quick retreat, the flimsy excuse, and that damned look at Jerry. I decided right then and there I wasn't going to let this go. I deserved to know what was going on in my own home, especially when it involved my son's wife. Michael was a good man, a hard worker. He didn't deserve to be played for a fool, and I wasn't about to stand by and watch it happen, not on my watch. I stood up, leaning heavily on my cane. My back protested with a sharp twinge, but I ignored it. I had a mission now, and I wasn't going to let a little back pain, or a noisy neighbor, or a lying daughter-in-law stop me. I took a deep breath and started toward the house, my mind already racing. I needed a plan, I needed information, and I needed to figure out what, if anything, Jerry had to do with all of this. Was Bethany lying, and did Jerry's presence have anything to do with it? "Lord, give me strength," I muttered, pushing myself off the porch swing. My back felt like it was full of gravel. I swear, getting old is not for the faint of heart. I knew I couldn't confront Bethany directly. Not yet. I needed proof, something concrete. And where do you find concrete these days? Follow the money, sweeties. That's what I always said back at the firm. Numbers don't lie. People do, but not numbers. So, Operation Follow the Money was a go. The problem? Bethany wasn't stupid. She was, as they say, tech-savvy. Back in my day, tech-savvy meant you knew how to program the VCR. Now it means you can build a damn spaceship in your basement. I figured I'd start with the obvious, her online banking. Michael, bless his heart, isn't exactly the most observant man. I knew Bethany used online banking for almost everything. Amazon, Zelle, God knows what else these young people buy online. All I needed was a peek, a little glimpse into her Wells Fargo account. The plan was simple, or so I thought. I'd casually offer to make us all some of my famous Earl Grey tea, extra bergamot, just the way she likes it. Then, while she was distracted with Jerry and his endless blather about lawn care, for heaven's sake, I'd borrow her phone. Bethany was in the kitchen, laughing a little too loudly at something Jerry had said. I could smell the sickly sweet scent of his lawn fertilizer drifting in through the open window. It mingled unpleasantly with the lemon polish I used on the dining room table. "Honey," I said, trying to keep my voice light, "how about I make us all some tea, my treat?" Bethany turned, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Oh, that's sweet, Helen, but I'm fine. Maybe later." "Nonsense," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "It'll only take a minute. Besides, you know I make the best Earl Grey this side of the Mississippi." I managed a weak smile. She hesitated, then finally relented. Okay, but I can help." "Absolutely not," I insisted. "You just sit and chat with Jerry. I need to stretch my legs anyway. Doctor says I need to keep moving, you know." I busied myself with the kettle, the tea bags, the sugar bowl, anything to appear casual. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. "Where's your phone, sweetie?" I asked, a little too casually. I need to look up how long to steep the tea. A blatant lie. I knew it by heart. 3 minutes, exactly. "It's right here," she said, patting her purse. "But I know it's 3 minutes, Helen. You've told me a million times." Damn it, foiled again. "Oh, right," I said, pretending to chuckle. "Silly me, old age, you know." I poured the boiling water into the teapot, the steam clouding my glasses. I peered over the rim, watching Bethany. She was now deeply engrossed in conversation with Jerry. Something about the correct pH balance for azaleas. Honestly, the man was a walking, talking fertilizer encyclopedia. This was my chance. "Bethany, could you grab the honey from the pantry? It's on the top shelf. My back is killing me today." She frowned, but stood up. "Sure, Helen." As soon as she disappeared into the pantry, I pounced. I grabbed her purse, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. Inside, nestled amongst lipstick and receipts from God knows where, was her iPhone. I snatched it up, my hands trembling. I knew the passcode was her birthday. I punched it in. Wrong. Damn. I tried Michael's birthday. Wrong again. This woman had more security than Fort Knox. Then I noticed something. A tiny app icon, almost hidden on the last page of her home screen. A little blue shield with a white key. VPN secure. What in the blue blazes was that? I quickly Googled it on my own phone. Virtual private network, encryption, privacy software. My heart sank. This wasn't just a simple passcode. This was serious. She was deliberately hiding something. Bethany emerged from the pantry, a jar of honey in her hand. "Here you go, Helen. Is everything all right?" I shoved a phone back into her purse, my face flushed. "Fine, sweetie, just fine. Tea's almost ready." I poured the tea, my hands shaking so badly I nearly spilled it. I handed Bethany her cup, forcing a smile. She took a sip, her eyes never leaving mine. "Thanks, Helen. This is perfect." Perfect? Nothing was perfect. I had failed, miserably. She was too smart for me. She had all this fancy technology protecting her secrets. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. How was I ever going to find out what she was hiding if she was this careful? How could I protect Michael from whatever was going on? I looked at Jerry, happily munching on a biscuit, oblivious to the tension in the room. He had to know something. He had to be involved. But how could I get him to talk? And more importantly, how could I crack Bethany's digital fortress? This wasn't just a suspicious phone call anymore. This was about something much bigger, something much darker. And I was running out of time. How can I uncover Bethany's financial secrets when she's so tech-savvy? Lord have mercy, I muttered under my breath, adjusting my floral scarf. Cracking Bethany's digital fortress? It felt like trying to break into Fort Knox with a butter knife. But Michael was my boy, and I wasn't about to let some carpetbagger waltz in and ruin his life. I needed information, and Bethany, bless her heart, wasn't about to hand it over on a silver platter. So I decided to take a page out of her book, Be Sneaky. The next morning, I told Michael I was heading to the grocery store. Instead, I steered my Buick LeSabre, bless her reliable old heart, straight towards First Atlanta Bank on Peachtree. It was the bank Bethany used. I'd seen her deposit checks there a few times. My arthritis was acting up something fierce that day. The walk from the parking lot felt like climbing Stone Mountain. I hobbled inside, the cool air conditioning a welcome relief from the Atlanta heat. The place smelled of stale coffee and that weird lemon scent they pump into banks to make you feel like your money's growing on trees. I got in line, shuffling along with the other retirees cashing their Social Security checks and young bucks trying to look important on their lunch breaks. Finally, I reached the teller window. A young woman with bright pink hair and enough piercings to set off a metal detector greeted me with a practiced smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" I plastered on my sweetest, most grandmotherly grin. "Good morning, dear. I'm Helen Parker, and I'm trying to help my daughter-in-law Bethany with some financial matters." I leaned in conspiratorially. "She's a bit of a scatterbrain, you see, and I'm just trying to keep things organized for her." The teller's smile didn't waver, but I could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Suspicion, maybe? "I understand, Mrs. Parker, but for security reasons, I can only discuss account information with the account holder herself." "Oh, I know, honey, I know," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "I just need to confirm a few things. See, Bethany has been mentioning some discrepancies with her online banking. Said something about a new account she didn't recognize." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It's probably just a mistake, but you know how these things can be, especially with all this internet fraud going around. They're even sending fake IRS letters now. Can you believe it?" I watched her carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. She tapped a manicured nail on the keyboard. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Parker, but I really can't provide any information about her accounts. Even to confirm or deny the existence of a new account would be a violation of her privacy." "Oh, I know, honey, I know," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "I just need to confirm a few things. See, Bethany has been mentioning some discrepancies with her online banking. Said something about a new account she didn't recognize." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It's probably just a mistake, but you know how these things can be, especially with all this internet fraud going around. They're even sending fake IRS letters now. Can you believe it?" I watched her carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. She tapped a manicured nail on the keyboard. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Parker, but I really can't provide any information about her accounts. Even to confirm or deny the existence of a new account would be a violation of her privacy." Foiled again. "Well, isn't that a pickle?" I said, trying to sound disappointed, but not defeated. "I suppose I understand. But what if there was fraudulent activity on her account? What should I do then?" "In that case," the teller said, her voice softening slightly, "Bethany would need to come in person with her ID and report the suspected fraud. We can then investigate and take the necessary steps to protect her account." Of course, I said, nodding slowly. "That makes perfect sense." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, floral-patterned checkbook. Well, while I'm here, I might as well deposit this check. It's for my property taxes. Seems like they go up every year, those snake oil salesmen in the government. As she processed the deposit, I casually glanced around the bank. Security cameras were everywhere, watching my every move. I spotted a flyer advertising some new investment scheme. Secure your future, it proclaimed. Bullshit. The only thing secured these days was the price of gas going up. Here you go, Mrs. Parker, the teller said, handing me a receipt. Have a nice day. You too, dear, I said, taking the receipt and tucking it into my purse, and hobbled away, feeling like a deflated balloon. Outside, the Atlanta heat hit me like a wall. I sank into the plush seat of my Buick, feeling utterly defeated. That was a dead end. Bethany's secrets were locked up tighter than Fort Knox. I needed a new plan, and fast. As I drove home, an idea began to form in my mind. A risky idea, a desperate idea, but an idea nonetheless. If the bank wouldn't give me the information I needed, maybe I could get it another way. Maybe it was time to consult a lawyer. Find out what my legal options were. Subpoena power, court orders, it all sounded so drastic. But desperate times called for desperate measures, especially when my son's happiness was on the line. Was I really ready to drag Bethany into court, to publicly expose whatever secrets she was so desperately trying to hide? The thought made my stomach churn. But what choice did I have? Would I resort to legal means to expose Bethany's secrets? Hell with the lawyers! That was the first thought that popped into my head as I walked through my front door. The cool air from the central AC, a blessed relief from the suffocating Atlanta humidity. Lawyers meant retainers. Retainers meant dipping into the money my dear Robert left me, money I guarded like a dragon guards its gold. All that paperwork, the depositions, the endless soul-sucking hours billed in 6-minute increments. I'd spent 40 years as an accountant, honey. I know how the sausage gets made, and it's always the client who ends up paying for the grinder. I kicked off my sensible shoes and padded into the kitchen, the linoleum cool against my tired feet. The house was quiet, filled with the scent of lemon pledge and the faint, sweet smell of the Earl Grey tea I'd left in the pot this morning. I poured what was left into my favorite mug, the one with the chip on the rim that Robert always said gave it character, and sat down in my worn armchair, the one with the permanent indent shaped exactly like me. Dragging Bethany's name through the mud in a public courtroom felt unclean. It was a sledgehammer approach, and I've always preferred a scalpel. My mind, trained by decades of tracking debits and credits, of finding the one misplaced decimal point in a sea of numbers, knew there had to be a cleaner way, a more elegant solution. Just as I was taking a sip of lukewarm tea, a key turned in my front door. My heart did a little jump skip. It was Bethany, using the emergency key I'd given her. "Helen, you home?" she called out, her voice dripping with a sweetness that could give a hummingbird diabetes. She breezed into the living room, a vision in a crisp white linen dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She was holding a bakery box. "Oh, good! I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop off some of those blueberry muffins you like." As if she baked a day in her life. Those were from that fancy place, the Gilded Crumb, over in Buckhead. I could tell by the gold foil on the box. Still, I forced a smile. "Why, that's so thoughtful of you, dear. Come, sit." "Can't stay long," she said, placing the box on my coffee table. "Just wanted to check in." Her iPhone, a device she was surgically attached to, buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, and I saw it, that same flicker of panic in her eyes, that tightening around her mouth. It was the same look she had at the bank. "Oh, excuse me, Helen, I have to take this," she said, her voice suddenly strained. She snatched the phone and walked quickly towards the back of the house, heading for the screened-in porch. The way she moved, you'd think the call was about national security. This was my chance. My arthritis screamed in protest, but I pushed myself up, quiet as a cat. I crept to the doorway of the kitchen, which gave me a clear line of sight to the porch. Bethany had her back to me, her shoulders hunched. Her voice was a low, urgent murmur, impossible to make out clearly. No, not yet, she was whispering. The garden isn't ready for planting. It's too exposed here. A pause. Listen, the delivery of the special fertilizer has been delayed. Tell him the gardener is being extremely cautious. Gardener? Fertilizer? The girl couldn't keep a succulent alive. What in God's name was she talking about? It was code. It had to be. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about secret bank accounts anymore. This was something else entirely. Something dirty. She hung up and turned, a fake, bright smile plastered back on her face. Sorry about that. Work stuff. You know how it is. Of course, dear, I said, my own smile feeling like a cheap mask. Everything all right? Peachy, she said, a little too quickly. Well, I've really got to run. Enjoy the muffins. And just like that, she was gone, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume and a box of overpriced baked goods in her wake. I stood there for a long moment, my mind racing. The bank was a dead end. A lawyer was a bazooka. But this I could work with. This was a puzzle, and I love puzzles. I went straight to the hall closet, past the vacuum cleaner and the box of old Christmas ornaments, and reached for a dusty old case on the top shelf. I pulled it down, blew a layer of dust off the top, and clicked open the latches. Inside, nestled in molded gray plastic, was my old Sony TC-110, a portable cassette tape recorder. Robert had bought it for me in the late 70s to record lectures for a night class I was taking. It was a relic, a dinosaur, from a time before everything was a cloud or an app. It was heavy, it was clunky, and it was perfect. I found a blank tape, a Maxell 60-minute, still in its cellophane wrapper, and a couple of fresh C batteries in the junk drawer. The machine whirred to life with a satisfying clunk when I pressed the record and play buttons together. A wave of nostalgia washed over me. This was real, tangible, not like the digital ghosts that live inside Bethany's phone. My plan was simple. Bethany often came over on Tuesday afternoons, claiming she was checking in on me before she picked up her son, my grandson, from his fancy private school nearby. She always took a work call on the porch. Next Tuesday, I'd be ready. I'd place the recorder under the wicker armchair on the porch, hidden by one of my overgrown ferns. It was an old trick, something you'd see on Columbo, but sometimes the old ways are the best, aren't they? The week crawled by. On Tuesday, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. She arrived right on schedule, this time with a potted orchid. Lord, give me strength. Just as I predicted, her phone buzzed. Oh, Helen, so sorry. I have to step out for this, she said, already moving towards the porch. I held my breath, listening from the kitchen. I could hear the faint murmur of her voice. 10 minutes later, she came back in, all smiles. After she left, I practically sprinted to the porch, my arthritis being ow. I retrieved the recorder, my hands trembling slightly. Back in my armchair, I put on my reading glasses, popped the cassette into the machine, and pressed rewind. The whirring sound was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. Then I pressed play. First, the hiss of the tape, then her voice, tinny and distant, but clear enough. The packages have been mailed, she said, all 5 of them, different post offices, just like we discussed. A pause. No, the client is happy, says the artwork is of the highest quality. Another long pause. Tell him the next gallery opening is scheduled for the 15th. We need to make sure the invitations are sent to the correct addresses. No mistakes this time. We can't afford another complication. Artwork, gallery opening, client. It was all nonsense. Beautiful, elegant, terrifying nonsense. It was a code, plain and simple. And I, Helen Parker, retired accountant and professional needle and haystack finder, was going to crack it. But as I sat there in the quiet of my living room, the little tape recorder humming on the table, I was faced with a chilling question. How in the hell do you decipher a language you don't even know exists?
Well, bless her heart, I said, trying to keep the acid out of my voice. And just where did this windfall come from, sweetie? I wasn't aware Bethany had any long-lost relatives showering her with assets. Bethany, bless her naive soul, actually blushed. Oh, it's a bit complicated, Helen. It turns out I had a distant cousin, like 3 times removed, who lived up in Maine. I never even knew she existed, but she passed away recently and left me a property. A property? That's all she said. A property. As if it were a stray cat she'd adopted. A property? I repeated, my voice dripping with sugar. And what kind of property are we talking about, dear? A charming little cottage? A sprawling estate? Or perhaps a timeshare in Orlando with a hefty maintenance fee? She shifted uncomfortably, fiddling with the strap of her Michael Kors purse, the one I suspect she bought with a credit card she can barely afford to pay off. It's a bit more than that, Helen. It's actually quite substantial. A whole lot of land with buildings. Buildings, plural. My eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into my hairline. Bethany, who consistently overdrafts her checking account and once tried to pawn my silver tea set, was suddenly the proud owner of a whole lot of land with buildings? Something smelled fishier than day-old shrimp. Oh, really, sweetie? And what kind of buildings are we talking about? Because last I checked, the only buildings you ever frequented were the clearance rack at Macy's and that Starbucks on Peachtree. I could practically feel the heat radiating from her cheeks. It's a farm, she mumbled, avoiding my gaze. An old, abandoned farm, with a barn and a farmhouse and outbuildings. A farm, right, and I'm the Queen of England. Honey, I admire your creativity, but I've been around the block a few times, and I know a snake oil salesman when I see one. You've been struggling to make ends meet since the day you married my boy, and now suddenly, out of the blue, you inherit a farm? In Maine, no less? Where you don't know a soul? I reached for my Earl Grey, needing the comforting warmth to soothe my rising agitation. My hands were starting to tremble, a sure sign my arthritis was kicking in. I hate getting old. Look, Helen, she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I have the paperwork to prove it. Paperwork, the universal shield of the con artist. Oh, I'm sure you do, dear. I'm sure you have all sorts of official-looking documents. But let me tell you something, Bethany. My daddy always said, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And this whole story smells like a truckload of fertilizer. She huffed, pulling a folded stack of papers from her purse. Fine, here, look at them yourself. See for yourself that I'm not lying. She thrust the papers at me, and I reluctantly took them. They felt crisp and official, with embossed seals and fancy legal jargon. I reached for my reading glasses again, peering at the documents. There were deeds, wills, and a whole slew of legalese that made my head spin. For the moment, the documents looked legitimate. Too legitimate, perhaps. These look official, I admitted, my voice laced with suspicion. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're on the level. Anyone with a decent printer and a little know-how can create convincing forgeries these days, and I know that more than most. Helen, I swear to you, this is real. I've already spoken with a lawyer in Maine, and she's handling the estate. I'm going up there next week to see the property myself. A lawyer in Maine, I echoed, my mind racing. That could be easily arranged. A phone call, a fabricated persona. It was all too easy. I handed the documents back to her, my gaze unwavering. Bethany, I'm not accusing you of anything, but I'm also not stupid. I know you, sweetie. I know your tendencies, and I can't help but feel there's more to this story than you're letting on. I studied her face, searching for any sign of deception, a flicker of the eyes, a twitch of the mouth, anything that would betray her. But her expression remained stubbornly innocent. Helen, I understand your skepticism, but I promise you, this is all on the up and up. I wanted to share the good news with you. Good news, that's what she called it. As I watched her gather her things, a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if this inheritance wasn't just about money? What if it was about something else entirely? Something connected to that cryptic conversation on the porch? She turned to leave, a hopeful smile on her face. I'll keep you updated, Helen. Maybe you can come visit me on the farm sometime. I forced a smile in return, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Was this inheritance real, or was it just another carefully constructed piece of the puzzle? Another layer of deception in a game I didn't even understand the rules of? And more importantly, was my son's life about to be turned upside down by his own wife?
"Oh, please, Bethany," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed sarcasm. "Spare me the theatrics. I wasn't born yesterday, you know. Back in my day, we called a spade, not some fancy garden implement." I watched her carefully, the faint scent of her expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5 if I wasn't mistaken, doing little to mask the stench of her deception. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, a picture of wounded innocence. "Helen, I'm truly hurt that you would think so little of me. After everything, after all the support I've given David." "Support?" I scoffed internally. "Support in the form of draining his bank account with shopping trips to Bloomingdale's and girls' weekends in Vegas? Support that involved whispered phone calls in the dead of night and a sudden, inexplicable aversion to family dinners? Honey, you want to talk about support? Let's talk about how I practically raised that boy myself after his father passed. Let's talk about the years I spent scrimping and saving, making sure he had every opportunity. Don't try to sell me this supportive wife act, because I'm not buying it." I could feel my blood pressure rising, a familiar sensation that always accompanied dealing with Bethany's brand of manipulative charm. Lord, give me strength. I had to stay calm, even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream. I needed to get to the bottom of this, for David's sake. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Helen," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "but I find it incredibly offensive. I came here to share some wonderful news, and all I've received is suspicion and hostility." "Wonderful news? A mysterious inheritance from a relative you never mentioned before? A relative conveniently located in a state you've never visited? Don't you think that raises a few red flags, sweetie?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "Don't you think your husband, my son, deserves to know every single detail? Or are you planning on keeping this little windfall all to yourself?" Her eyes narrowed, the mask of innocence momentarily slipping. "David doesn't need to be burdened with every little detail of my life. He has enough on his plate as it is." "Burdened?" I repeated incredulously. "Knowing where his wife's money comes from is a burden? Knowing if she's hiding something is a burden? What kind of marriage do you two have, Bethany? Or should I be asking, do you have a marriage?" She stood up abruptly, knocking over her purse. A lipstick, a compact mirror, and a crumpled receipt from Tiffany's spilled onto the floor. I raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. Let her squirm. "I'm not going to stand here and be interrogated like some common criminal," she said. "I came here out of respect for you, Helen, but clearly that was a mistake. I'll just leave you to your suspicions." As she bent down to gather her belongings, I subtly reached into my pocket and pressed the record button on my iPhone. The phone was in my pocket, pointed at her. Small, petty, but necessary. I needed proof, because I had a feeling this was going to get a whole lot messier. "Fine, Bethany, leave. But don't think for 1 second that this conversation is over. I'm going to find out the truth, one way or another. And if I discover that you've been lying to David, that you've been playing him for a fool," I let the threat hang in the air. She straightened up, her eyes blazing. "You're delusional, Helen. You're letting your age and your paranoia get the best of you. Maybe you should talk to someone about that." Paranoia? That was her game. Gaslighting me, making me doubt my own sanity, trying to paint me as a crazy old woman clinging to the past. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. "Oh, I'll talk to someone, sweetie," I said, my voice deceptively calm. "I'll talk to a lawyer. I'll talk to a private investigator. I'll talk to anyone who can help me uncover the truth." She glared at me, her face flushed with anger. "You're making a big mistake, Helen. You're going to regret this." "Maybe I will, Bethany, but I'd rather regret finding out the truth than live with a lie." She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The sound reverberated through the silent living room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my growing unease. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I was an old woman, yes, but I was not stupid. I trusted my gut, and my gut was screaming that something was terribly wrong. I slumped into my armchair, the worn fabric familiar and comforting. I needed a cup of Earl Grey, strong and hot, to soothe my nerves. And then I needed a plan. I had a son to protect and a daughter-in-law who was quickly becoming my worst nightmare. I pulled out my checkbook from Wells Fargo. I knew just the man to call, a retired cop I knew from my bowling league. He needed the money, and he was discreet. The game was on, but was I already too late?
"Honey, you think I'm making a mistake?" I asked, a smile playing on my lips that would curdle milk. I leaned forward, reached into the side pocket of my floral print armchair, and pulled out my iPhone 8. Bless Apple for making these things relatively user-friendly, even for us dinosaurs. "What's that, Mother Parker? Going to call the cops on me because I hurt your feelings?" Bethany sneered, arms crossed, still standing in the doorway. "Oh, Bethany, sweetie, you flatter yourself thinking you could hurt my feelings. This, my dear, is a little insurance policy." I tapped the screen a few times, navigating to my voice memos. The air crackled with anticipation. Even I felt a little thrill. "Insurance policy? What are you babbling about?" I ignored her and turned up the volume. The living room filled with the unmistakable sound of Bethany's own voice, clear as a bell. The deal with those things in Duluth wasn't exactly above board, you know. Little kickbacks here, a little creative accounting there. Bethany froze, her face paling faster than a ghost in a snowstorm. I watched the color drain from her, a small, wicked satisfaction blooming in my chest. "Insurance policy? What are you babbling about?" I ignored her and turned up the volume. The living room filled with the unmistakable sound of Bethany's own voice, clear as a bell. The deal with those things in Duluth wasn't exactly above board, you know. Little kickbacks here, a little creative accounting there. Bethany froze, her face paling faster than a ghost in a snowstorm. I watched the color drain from her, a small, wicked satisfaction blooming in my chest. The recording continued, Bethany's voice detailing the shady dealings surrounding some property investments my son Mark had naively trusted her with. There were mentions of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and something about avoiding certain taxes that made my blood run cold. Mark was a good man, an honest man. The thought of him being dragged down into this swamp of corruption made me sick. The recording ended abruptly, the silence hanging heavy in the air. I looked up at Bethany, her eyes wide with panic. "Recognize that voice, sweetie? Sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I've been recording our little chats, Bethany. You see, I learned a thing or two in my days as an accountant. Always keep a paper trail, or, in this case, a digital one." She swallowed hard, trying to regain her composure. That's doctored. You can't possibly think anyone would believe that. You're grasping at straws, Helen. This is ridiculous." "Doctored, huh? Funny, it sounds pretty convincing to me. And I've got a pretty good ear. Seen a few things in my time. Remember those fancy new hearing aids I got a few months ago? Well, they pick up a lot more than just the birds chirping, honey." I could see the wheels turning in her head, the calculations she was making. She knew she was caught, but she wasn't about to give up without a fight. "Even if that were true," she said, her voice regaining some of its steeliness,
It's inadmissible in court. You can't just record people without their consent. It's illegal, Helen. You've broken the law, Helen. Oh, Bethany, sweetie, you think I didn't know that? You think I haven't thought this through? I may be old, but I'm not senile. I know the law. And I also know that certain exceptions can be made when there's a reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. And believe me, honey, I have more than reasonable suspicion. I gestured to the recording, now silent on my phone. This isn't just about some little white lie, Bethany. This is about fraud, about potentially destroying my son's life. I'm not going to let you get away with it. She took a step back, her eyes darting around the room, as if looking for an escape route. You can't prove anything. It's just a recording. It could be anyone's voice. I'll deny everything. Oh, I think I can prove plenty, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I have other recordings, Bethany, lots of them. And I have people who are very interested in hearing what you have to say. Remember that retired cop, Frank, from the bowling league? Turns out he knows a few people in the FBI. They are extremely interested in some of the deals you have been making, especially those dealings around Savannah. Something about building a hospital for underprivileged folk. Seems you skimmed a little off the top, honey, and they have a problem with that. I watched her face crumble, the carefully constructed facade of innocence finally cracking under the pressure. Good. Let her feel the fear, the panic, the weight of her own lies. "What do you want?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I smiled, a genuine, hard smile that hadn't touched my face in a long time. I want the truth, Bethany, and I want you to leave my son alone. And I want all the money you stole from him returned, every single penny. I stood up, my arthritis twinging in my knees, but my resolve stronger than ever. And if you don't cooperate, sweetie, I promise you, you will regret the day you ever walked into my son's life. I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over me. All this was taking a toll. I suddenly remembered a newspaper article that I had been reading about the local water supply in Atlanta, something about PFAs. I was so sick of all the bad news. She stared at me, her eyes filled with hatred and fear. Had I finally cornered her, or was this just the beginning of a much longer, much uglier fight?
Well, isn't that the pot calling the kettle black, honey? I said, letting the words drip with sarcasm. I wasn't about to let her cower. Not now. Not when I was this close. I walked over to the antique writing desk in the corner, the one my late husband, bless his soul, had painstakingly restored. I opened the bottom drawer, the wood protesting with a low groan. Inside, nestled amongst old tax returns and faded photographs, was the manila envelope I'd been waiting to unveil. I wasn't born yesterday, Bethany, I said, turning back to face her. I may be pushing 73, but I still have a few tricks up my sleeve. I pulled out the contents of the envelope, meticulously copied documents, bank statements, property deeds. Remember that little inheritance you claimed to have received from your dear departed Aunt Mildred? The one that conveniently allowed you to invest in that disastrous business venture with poor, gullible Robert? I tapped the documents with a manicured nail. These, sweetie, are official records from the county courthouse. They show that the property you supposedly inherited, the one you used as collateral for that loan, was fraudulently transferred. The signature on the deed? Forged. Aunt Mildred never owned the property in the first place. I watched her, my heart hammering in my chest. I had her. I could feel it. The air in the room, thick with tension, crackled like static electricity. The scent of Earl Grey from my neglected teacup seemed to mock the drama unfolding. In fact, I continued, pressing my advantage, I had Frank from the bowling league run the signature by a forensic expert. Turns out your Aunt Mildred signed the document last Tuesday.
Mildred's been dead for 15 years, you see. I leaned in closer, my voice a low, dangerous purr. So, unless she's risen from the grave to dabble in real estate fraud, I'd say you're in a bit of trouble, wouldn't you? I expected tears. I expected a confession. I expected her to crumble completely. What I didn't expect was the chillingly calm smirk that slowly spread across her face. "Oh, Helen," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "You really thought you had me, didn't you?" My stomach dropped. Something was terribly wrong. "Those documents," she began, pausing for dramatic effect. "They're very impressive, I'll give you that. A lot of work went into them, I'm sure." She rose from the chair, smoothing down her perfectly tailored dress. But they're utterly useless. I stared at her, dumbfounded. "What are you talking about? They prove the property transfer was fraudulent." Bethany chuckled, a cold, brittle sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, the transfer was fraudulent. I won't deny that. But you see, Helen, you're operating under a false assumption. You think I still own that property. You think you can use these documents to get it back for Robert. You think that will somehow solve everything." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But the truth is, sweetie, I don't own it anymore. Not for a long time." I felt a knot of dread tighten in my gut. What did you do with it? Bethany's smile widened, revealing a flash of teeth. "I donated it to charity." My mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. Donated it? To what charity? "A little organization I found," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "They do such wonderful work with underprivileged children. I believe it was called the Atlanta Children's Fund, a very worthy cause, don't you think?" I felt the blood drain from my face. The Atlanta Children's Fund? That was a legitimate charity. There was no way to trace any fraud once it was donated. That little snake had covered her tracks. You can't do that," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, but I already did, Helen," she said, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Months ago, before you even started your little investigation. The property is legally theirs now. Your pretty little documents are about as useful as a screen door on a submarine." My knees buckled and I sank back into my chair, the wind completely knocked out of me. All that work, all that effort, all that hope, gone. Vanished in a puff of smoke. I remembered the article I read just this morning about the Atlanta water supply. Something about PFAS contaminations and lawsuits. It felt like another layer of bad news piled on top of everything else. Pointless, like everything else. "But why?" I asked, my voice hoarse with despair. "Why would you do this? Why would you hurt Robert like this?" Bethany shrugged, her expression unreadable. "Let's just say I have my reasons, and let's also say that I'm much better at playing this game than you are, Helen." She turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "Enjoy your tea, sweetie. You're going to need it." And then she was gone, leaving me alone with the bitter taste of defeat and the chilling realization that this was far from over. But wait, something wasn't adding up. Even if the land was no longer retrievable, I remembered Robert vaguely mentioning that Thanaza had set up the Atlanta Children's Fund herself. Is there a way to prove she is still associated with the fund somehow? "Well, fiddle-dee-dee," I muttered under my breath, the phrase popping into my head from who knows where. This was it. Family court. Bethany's lawyer, some young buck in a ridiculously expensive suit, was currently droning on about legal precedents and property rights. I swear, he sounded like a broken record. My own lawyer, bless his heart, looked about as cheerful as a wet dish rag. He'd tried, he really had. He'd spent hours poring over those documents I'd painstakingly gathered, looking for a loophole, a technicality, anything to give us an edge. But Bethany, that sly little fox, had covered her tracks too well. The lawyer was holding up a document, some fancy legal jargon printed on it. "As you can see, Your Honor," he was saying, his voice dripping with smugness, "the transfer of the property to the Atlanta Children's Fund was entirely legitimate and irreversible. There is no legal basis for Mrs. Parker's claims." I could feel Robert's eyes on me, pleading, hopeful. He didn't understand. He still couldn't believe Bethany was capable of such a thing. I wanted to tell him, "Honey, you're too good for this world," but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt like sandpaper. My lawyer stood to make a final statement. He was a good man, but I could see the defeat in his eyes. He gave a weak summary of our case, pointing out the circumstantial evidence, the questionable timing of the transfer, the PFAS article I'd read about. It was so pointless now. The judge barely looked up from his paperwork. Then, the hammer. "Based on the evidence presented," the judge announced, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, "this court finds in favor of the defendant. The property transfer is deemed legal and valid. Case dismissed." Dismissed. Just like that. All that I had uncovered, all the late nights and the anxiety, reduced to nothing. Robert reached for my hand, his face a mask of disappointment. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm so sorry." "Don't be, honey," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's not your fault." But inside, I was crumbling. The young buck lawyer gave me a patronizing smile as he gathered his papers. "I trust this puts an end to your misguided efforts, Mrs. Parker," he said, his tone condescending. "Perhaps you should focus on enjoying your retirement." That's when something snapped. Something inside me just broke. I blinked a few times, looked around the courtroom with a confused expression. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What's going on?" Robert squeezed my hand tighter. "Mom, are you okay? We're in court." I frowned, as if trying to remember. Court? What court? Did I forget to take my medicine again? I reached up and touched my forehead, pretending to be disoriented. Oh dear, I get so confused these days. My memory isn't what it used to be. Getting old is a real pain in the, well, you know. Bethany was watching me, her brow furrowed. I could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She probably thought I was putting on an act, and maybe I was, a little, but it was also a little true. The stress of all this had taken its toll. My arthritis was acting up something awful, and my memory was getting a little spotty around the edges. "Mom, maybe we should go home," Robert said, his voice filled with concern. "Yes, dear," I said, leaning heavily on his arm. "Home sounds lovely. Maybe I'll have a nice cup of Earl Grey and a nap. I seem to have misplaced my checkbook as well." As we shuffled out of the courtroom, I could hear Bethany whispering something to her lawyer. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. They both thought I was just an old woman, losing her grip on reality. Good. Let them think that. Let them underestimate me. Because even though I had lost this battle, the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Even if the land was gone, there was still the Atlanta Children's Fund. I remembered Robert mentioning once that Bethany had been instrumental in setting it up. If I could find a way to prove she was still involved, still pulling the strings, then maybe, just maybe, I could expose her for what she really was. I remembered the look on her face when she left me with my tea, the look of triumph. She thought she had won. She thought she had outsmarted me. She was wrong. As we walked to the car, I straightened my back and took a deep breath. The air smelled like exhaust fumes and disappointment, but underneath it all, I could detect a faint scent of hope. I had a feeling that Bethany's little secret past wasn't as buried as she thought it was. I just needed to find the right shovel. And maybe, just maybe, play the dementia card a little bit longer. It seemed to be working like a charm. I looked up at Robert, forcing a weak smile. "Don't worry, honey," I said. "Everything's going to be all right." But was it? Was this truly the end of my fight? Or was I merely descending to a new level of strategy? A level where I would use everyone's assumptions about an old woman's frailty to my advantage? And more importantly, was I prepared to play that game? Lord have mercy. The courthouse steps felt like Mount Everest to my arthritic knees. Robert, bless his heart, was trying to be supportive, but I could feel his doubt radiating off him in waves. Doubt about me, about the case, about everything. Inside, the air was thick with that stale government building smell. You know the one, like old paper and suppressed disappointment. Bethany and her slick lawyer were already there, perched on the hard benches like a pair of vultures eyeing carrion. Bethany had this little smirk playing around her lips, the kind that says, "I've already won." And God forgive me, but at that moment, I wanted to slap it right off her face. The hearing was a farce, a sideshow put on for the judge's benefit. Her lawyer, this young buck in a suit that probably cost more than my Social Security check for a year, droned on about my advanced age and diminished capacity. He even had the gall to bring up my little episodes, like the time I mistook the UPS guy for Robert, back from the dead. He painted me as a senile old bat, clinging to grudges and making things up. And Bethany? She just sat there, all innocent and wide-eyed, occasionally dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. The snake. When it was my turn to speak, I could feel my hands trembling, but I forced myself to meet the judge's gaze. I told him about Robert, about his dreams for the land, about how hard he had worked. I told him about Bethany's coldness, her distance, her lies. But it was like talking to a brick wall. He kept glancing at Bethany's lawyer, who would just shake his head sadly, like, "Poor old woman, lost her marbles." The judge ruled in Bethany's favor, of course, said something about insufficient evidence and the deceased's clear intentions. Bullshit. Robert would have never wanted this. He would have wanted me to fight. As we were leaving, Bethany made a point of stopping me in the hallway. "Helen," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I'm so sorry it had to come to this. I truly am." I just stared at her. "You think you've won, don't you?" I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You think you've gotten away with it?" She just smiled, that same smug smile. "Helen, you're not well. You need to rest." She reached out to pat my hand, but I yanked it away. That's when her lawyer stepped in, putting a hand on her arm. "Bethany, we should go." He looked at me, a flicker of something, pity, warning, in his eyes. "Mrs. Parker," he said, his voice low, "I understand your grief, but perhaps you should consider the Atlanta Children's Fund. Ensure all is in order. Sometimes, even charities can attract unwanted attention from, say, the IRS." He didn't elaborate, but the implication hung in the air like a bad smell. He knew something. He knew about the fund. He knew it wasn't as squeaky clean as it appeared. Bethany's smile faltered for just a second, a flash of panic in her eyes. But then she recovered, smoothing her hair and turning to her lawyer. "Don't be ridiculous, David," she said, her voice sharp. "The Atlanta Children's Fund is a perfectly legitimate organization. Helen is just grasping at straws." David just shrugged, but his eyes lingered on me for a moment longer. He knew. He knew about the fund. He knew it wasn't as squeaky clean as it appeared. Bethany's smile faltered for just a second, a flash of panic in her eyes. But then she recovered, smoothing her hair and turning to her lawyer. "Don't be ridiculous, David," she said, her voice sharp. "The Atlanta Children's Fund is a perfectly legitimate organization. Helen is just grasping at straws." David just shrugged, but his eyes lingered on me for a moment longer. He knew. As they walked away, I felt a wave of despair wash over me, not just because I had lost the land, but because I realized the scope of what I was up against. Bethany wasn't just a greedy widow. She was something else, something dangerous, and she had people protecting her, people who knew the truth and were willing to look the other way. I sat down heavily on a nearby bench, the fight draining out of me like water from a leaky faucet. Robert came and sat beside me. "Honey," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I don't know if I can do this anymore."
I pulled my iPhone from my purse. I saw that Bethany had already Zelled the money from the sale. I felt faint. He put his arm around me, but I could feel the distance between us, the weight of his disappointment. He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. He hadn't seen the look in Bethany's eyes. He hadn't heard the lawyer's veiled threat. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the noise of the courthouse, the smug faces of Bethany and her cronies. I pictured Robert's face, his kind eyes, his gentle smile. I remembered his last words to me. "Take care of the land, Helen. It's all I have to leave you." Had I failed him? Had I let Bethany win? Was I truly just an old woman, past her prime, clinging to a lost cause? Or was there still a chance, however slim, to expose the truth and bring Bethany to justice? Can I recover from this devastating blow, or is Bethany untouchable? Hell, I was beat. I mean, truly, down to the marrow, soul-crushingly defeated. The drive home from the courthouse was a blur. I don't even remember pulling into my own driveway. One minute I was watching Bethany and that snake oil salesman of a lawyer walk away with my husband's legacy. The next, I was sitting on my own front porch swing, the chain groaning a sad little tune with every numb push of my foot. The air was thick and wet, that heavy Atlanta summer air that feels like you're breathing through a hot washcloth. My Earl Grey, which I'd made hours earlier, sat untouched on the wicker table next to me, a skin of condensation on the glass. Cold, just like me. I just sat there, watching the world go on without me. Cars drove by, kids on bicycles laughed, a dog barked down the street. It all felt so insulting. Didn't they know my world had just imploded? Didn't they know a monster was walking around with a check in her pocket? A check that should have been used to pay my property taxes, to fix the leaky roof, to maybe, just maybe, let me breathe a little easier on my Social Security income. The Zelle notification on my iPhone had been the final twist of the knife. Instant. No waiting for a check to clear. Just a digital puff of smoke, and Robert's land was converted into a number in her bank account. I felt a sharp pain in my hip, my arthritis flaring up with the stress of it all. It was a cruel reminder of my own body's betrayal, mirroring the bigger betrayals of the day. I was just an old woman. That's what they saw in court. That's all they saw. An old woman who couldn't keep up. I was so lost in my own miserable pity party that I almost didn't notice my neighbor, Jerry, shuffling across his lawn towards my porch. Jerry's a good man, retired from the post office, but Lord, he can be a talker. And right then, I didn't have the strength for small talk. I just wanted to be left alone to lick my wounds. "Helen?" he called out, his voice hesitant. He stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, clutching a fistful of mail. "You all right? Saw you pull in. You look like I feel after doing my taxes." I managed a weak, watery smile. "Something like that, Jerry. Just a long day." "Heard you had court today," he said, stepping up onto the porch, but keeping a respectful distance. "About the, I just nodded, my throat too tight to form words. I braced myself for the inevitable, "Well, you'll get 'em next time," or some other useless platitude. But Jerry surprised me. He just stood there, looking out at the street. He finally said, his voice low, "Robert loved that piece of land." That's when a single tear finally broke free and traced a hot path down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. She won, Jerry. She got it all. He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the hum of his air conditioner unit next door and the incessant, high-pitched electronic chirp of that newfangled security system he'd installed a few months back. A real top-of-the-line thing, he'd told me, with cameras that could probably see a flea on a dog from 50 yards, and microphones that picked up everything. It was a nuisance, frankly. I'd told him it was so sensitive, I was afraid to gossip on my own porch for fear he'd get a high-definition recording of it. "Helen," he said, turning to face me. He looked uncomfortable, like a man with a splinter in his finger he can't quite get out. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something odd." "Jerry, sweetie, if this is about Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses again, I really don't have the fight in me today," I said, my voice sharper than I intended.
No, it's not that, he said quickly. It's about Bethany. My head snapped up. What about her? He took a deep breath. It's this security system, he said, gesturing vaguely towards his house. The audio on it's too good. It picks up everything. When she's in her backyard, on her patio, talking on her cell phone, I can hear it. It comes through clear as a bell. I stared at him, my heart starting to beat a little faster. You've been listening to her private calls, Jerry? Not on purpose, he said, his face flushing. At first, it was just background noise, but then I heard her say Robert's name and your name. She was laughing, Helen, a real nasty kind of laugh. He swallowed hard. She was talking to someone, bragging about how she had everyone fooled, about some first husband and a life insurance policy back in Texas. It sounded criminal. I slowly rose from the swing, the rusty chain groaning in protest. Every ounce of exhaustion, every bit of despair, evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp, adrenaline-fueled focus. The accountant in me, the part that lived for numbers and evidence and ledgers that balanced, came roaring back to life. She was talking about her past? On the phone? In her backyard? I asked, my voice low and steady. Jerry nodded, his eyes wide, loud and clear, like she thought nobody could ever touch her. I felt funny about it, Helen. Felt like I was snooping. But after a couple of times, I started saving the recordings, the little video clips with the audio. I've got a whole folder of them on my computer. I didn't know what to do with them. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. The world, which had been gray and blurry just moments before, snapped into perfect, crystalline focus. The smug look on Bethany's face, the lawyer's veiled threats, the instant Zelle transfer. It wasn't just greed, it was a pattern, it was a profession. And my nosy neighbor, with his ridiculously oversensitive security camera, might have just recorded the whole thing. Could this be it? After all the dead ends and despair, will Jerry's recordings provide a final, undeniable piece of evidence I need to expose that woman for who she truly is? Well, I breathed, more to myself than to Jerry. The pieces were falling into place with a sickening thud. All this time, I'd been so focused on legal loopholes and financial discrepancies, I'd missed the obvious. I gripped the armrests of the swing, the metal cold beneath my fingers. Recordings, you say? Video clips? Honey, you have no idea what you've stumbled upon. Jerry shifted nervously, his eyes darting around his meticulously manicured lawn. The sprinkler system, I noticed, was timed to the second. Well, I didn't mean to snoop, Helen. You know I wouldn't. It's just that security camera is pretty sensitive, picks up everything. I usually just delete the stuff after a week or so. Figured it was nobody's business. But, well, Bethany's conversations, they just didn't sit right with me. He wrung his hands. I don't want any trouble, Helen. I'm just a simple man, living out my golden years. I don't need any drama. Drama? Sweetie, you're sitting knee-deep in a Shakespearean tragedy, and you're worried about drama? Trouble? I repeated, my voice rising a notch. Jerry, my son is gone. My grandson is being raised by a woman who, if what you're saying is true, is a sociopath. This isn't about trouble. This is about justice. My arthritis flared in my knuckles, but I ignored it. I was running on pure adrenaline now. What exactly did she say, Jerry? Don't leave anything out. Every detail matters. He hesitated, then sighed. Well, mostly it was just bragging, talking about how she was going to retire early, how she'd played everyone like a fiddle. She mentioned something about a life insurance policy from her first husband, said he was taken care of years ago in Texas. That's what really bothered me, Helen, the way she said it, like she was proud of it. My blood ran cold. Taken care of? What in God's name had my son married? And this first husband, did she mention a name? Yeah, Jerry said, his voice barely a whisper. She said his name was Dale something.
I can check the recordings." Dale. The name echoed in my head. I had to remember to ask the private investigator to look into this. It was sounding more and more like Bethany has done this before. Jerry, these recordings, they could be the key to everything. Do you understand that? They could prove she defrauded Michael, that she's been lying to us all along. He looked down at his polished loafers. "I know, Helen. That's why I haven't deleted them. But I'm worried. Bethany seems, well, she seems like the kind of woman who wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. I'm an old man, Helen. I live alone. I don't need that kind of stress." "Retaliate?" I scoffed. "Let her try. She'll have me to deal with first. Besides, you won't be alone. We'll protect you, Jerry. I'll get you a lawyer. I'll hire security, whatever it takes." "A lawyer?" He looked genuinely terrified. "I don't want to get involved with lawyers, Helen. Back in my day, lawyers were only a little better than snake oil salesmen." "Well, honey, times have changed, and we desperately need one right now." I stood up, towering over him despite my age and height. "Jerry, look at me. My son is dead. My grandson is being raised by a woman who, if what you're saying is true, is a sociopath. Are you going to let her get away with it?" He chewed on his lip, his gaze fixed on a rogue dandelion, stubbornly sprouting in his otherwise perfect lawn. The thing was probably from my yard. I've never been one for gardening. The HOA has sent me letters, I am sure, but I rarely open my mail these days. I don't know, Helen. This is a lot to ask. It's not just for me, Jerry. It's for Michael. It's for my grandson. It's for justice. Are you going to let fear dictate the rest of your life, or are you going to stand up and do what's right? My voice trembled, but it was with anger, not fear. I wouldn't let this woman win, not without a fight. I needed those recordings. I needed proof. And I needed Jerry to be brave enough to share what he knew. Think about it, Jerry. Just think about it. And then ask yourself, what would you want someone to do if they were in my shoes? If they were trying to protect their family from a monster? I turned and started back towards my house, my back aching, my heart pounding. I knew I couldn't force him, but I also knew that deep down, Jerry had a good heart. He might be a nosy busybody, but he wasn't a coward. I reached my porch, turned back, and looked at him one last time. Those recordings, Jerry, they're the only chance we have. He stared back at me, his face etched with worry. I'll think about it, Helen, I promise. Would thinking about it be enough? Would Jerry be brave enough to testify against Bethany? To risk his own safety and comfort for the sake of justice?
Well, I never, I muttered to myself, the memory of Jerry's worried face still etched in my mind. Some friend I am, putting the poor man through this. But then I remembered Michael, my sweet grandson, and the venomous web Bethany had spun around him. No, I wouldn't back down. I couldn't. The next few days were a blur of nervous energy. I barely slept, pacing my living room like a caged tiger. Every creak of the house, every car that slowed down on the street sent my heart racing. I kept the curtains drawn, the TV blaring some inane game show as background noise, trying to appear normal, but inside, I was a wreck. Then on Tuesday morning, my landline rang. Yes, I still have a landline. What of it? Call me old-fashioned. It was Jerry. His voice was barely a whisper. "Helen, it's me." "Jerry, what is it? What did you decide?" My voice was a strangled plea. I'll do it, but you have to promise me, Helen. Promise me you'll be careful." Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. "Oh, Jerry, you're a true friend. I promise, I will." The next morning, bright and early, Jerry slipped a small, unmarked envelope into my mailbox. Inside was a USB drive. I rushed inside, practically tripping over Mr. Whiskers, my lazy Persian cat, and plugged it into my ancient Dell laptop. There it was, hours of recordings. Bethany, in her own words, detailing her fraudulent activities, her connections to, let's just say, people who make their money in ways that are less than legal. Money laundering through that so-called charity? It was all there, the proof I needed, the proof Michael needed. My hands trembled as I copied the files onto a separate drive, then another and another. You can't be too careful, honey. Back in my day, we used carbon paper. The court date arrived like a looming storm cloud. I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, the one I usually reserve for funerals and the occasional wedding. I wanted to look strong, confident. I needed to project an image of unwavering resolve. Inside, though, I was a bundle of nerves. Michael was there, of course, looking pale and drawn. He kept glancing at Bethany, a mixture of confusion and betrayal in his eyes. I squeezed his hand, trying to offer some comfort. He squeezed back, his grip tight. Bethany, as always, was a vision of polished perfection. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless, her designer dress screaming money. Snake oil salesman come to life, that one. She sat there, serene, almost smug, as if she already knew how this would play out. But she didn't know about Jerry. She didn't know about the recordings. The trial dragged on, lawyers droning on about legal jargon, the judge looking bored. It was all so tedious. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand, my arthritis acting up something fierce, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. My lawyer, a sharp young woman named Sarah, guided me through the basics: my relationship with Michael, my concerns about Bethany, the irregularities I had noticed in the charity's financial statements. Then came the moment of truth. "Mrs. Parker," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong, "do you have any evidence to support your claims?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes, I do." I signaled to Sarah, who approached the judge. There was a brief, hushed conversation. Then Sarah turned back to me. "Your Honor," she said, "we would like to present audio recordings as evidence." Bethany stiffened, her eyes narrowed, the smugness vanishing, replaced by a flicker of fear. Hope bloomed in my chest. The courtroom fell silent as the recording began to play. Bethany's voice, clear as a bell, filled the room, detailing her fraudulent activities, her connections to the money laundering scheme. There was no denying it. It was her voice, her words, her crimes. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Michael stared at Bethany, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Even the judge seemed to be paying attention now. Bethany's lawyer jumped to his feet, objecting furiously, but the judge waved him down. The recording continued to play, each word a nail in Bethany's coffin. Then Jerry took the stand. He looked terrified, his hands trembling, but he spoke with conviction. He corroborated the recordings, explaining how he had become suspicious of Bethany, how he had installed the listening devices, the old busybody, how he had agonized over whether or not to come forward. Bethany's face was a study in fury. She glared at Jerry, her eyes burning with hatred. But it was too late. The dam had broken. The prosecution presented bank statements, emails, and other evidence that corroborated the recordings. It was all there, laid bare for everyone to see. Bethany's carefully constructed facade crumbled before our eyes. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, their verdict was swift and decisive, guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, I looked at Michael. Tears streamed down his face, but this time they were tears of relief. He turned to me, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." I smiled, my heart overflowing with love. "Anything for you, sweetie. Anything for you." Bethany was led away in handcuffs, her face contorted with rage. As she passed me, she spat out one word: "Bitch." I just smiled sweetly and waved. "Respect your elders, honey." But even as I savored the moment of victory, a nagging question lingered in my mind. Will Bethany face true justice for her crimes? Well handcuffed, right there. Bethany, looking like she swallowed a lemon whole, being led away by those officers. You could practically taste the vindication hanging in the air, thick as humidity on an Atlanta summer day. Michael squeezed my hand so hard, I thought my arthritis was going to flare up something fierce. but I didn't care. My grandbaby was finally free. He could breathe again, and that was all that mattered. The courtroom emptied out slowly, people whispering, pointing, shaking their heads. Jerry, bless his nosy little heart, shuffled over, looking like a stray puppy who'd finally found its home. "Mrs. Parker," he stammered, I just wanted to say—" "Jerry, honey," I said, patting his hand, "you did good. You did real good. Now go home and get some rest. You've earned it." The DA, a young buck with a slicked-back haircut and an expensive suit, came up to us, all smiles. "Mrs. Parker, a tremendous victory. Justice has been served." I gave him a polite nod. "Has it now? She was found guilty, sure as eggs is eggs. That's a fact. But I can't shake the feeling that we've only seen the tip of the iceberg, sweetie. Bethany didn't pull off a scam of that magnitude all by herself. No way, no how." He frowned, his smile faltering. "What do you mean?" "Think about it, son. Bethany, with her talent for lying and her fancy clothes, you think a small-time gal like her dreamt all that up all on her own? All the investment plans that were clearly a big Ponzi scheme, the fake documents, the offshore accounts? Bethany was a puppet. I knew the moment she said she worked for a company I had never heard of, a company so obscure it was like finding a needle in a haystack. She was taking orders from someone else, someone with a lot more power and money than she had." Michael looked at me, his brow furrowed. "Grandma, are you saying—" "I'm saying, Michael, that this whole thing stinks to high heaven. She'll most likely get a hefty sentence. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, they'll throw the book at her. But what about the people who are pulling her strings? Are they just going to walk away scot-free?" The DA sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We'll look into it, Mrs. Parker, I promise you that. But right now, we're just glad to have gotten her off the streets." "Glad to be rid of one little rat," I said, "while the big cheese gets away. You know what I mean. I'm on a fixed income, so I know what it's like to struggle to keep everything afloat. I am not stupid." We left the courthouse, and I was glad to get out of there. The air felt fresher outside, even with the Atlanta traffic buzzing around us. Michael drove me home, his face still etched with worry. "Grandma, you really think there's more to this?" "Sweetie, I know there's more to this. That woman didn't get that good at manipulation just by being charming. You don't learn to be that cold and calculating overnight. Someone taught her those tricks. Someone financed her. Someone gave her the confidence to pull this off." Michael looked at me, his brow furrowed. "Grandma, are you saying—" "I'm saying, Michael, that this whole thing stinks to high heaven. She'll most likely get a hefty sentence. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, they'll throw the book at her. But what about the people who were pulling her strings? Are they just going to walk away scot-free?" The DA sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We'll look into it, Mrs. Parker, I promise you that. But right now, we're just glad to have gotten her off the streets." "Glad to be rid of one little rat," I said, "while the big cheese gets away. You know what I mean. I'm on a fixed income, so I know what it's like to struggle to keep everything afloat. I am not stupid." We left the courthouse, and I was glad to get out of there. The air felt fresher outside, even with the Atlanta traffic buzzing around us. Michael drove me home, his face still etched with worry. "Grandma, you really think there's more to this?" "Sweetie, I know there's more to this. That woman didn't get that good at manipulation just by being charming. You don't learn to be that cold and calculating overnight. Someone taught her those tricks. Someone financed her. Someone gave her the confidence to pull this off." I sat on my porch swing that evening, sipping my Earl Grey, watching the fireflies blink in the twilight. The crickets chirped, the same as they always did, but tonight, their song felt different. It felt like a warning. The neighborhood cat, a scraggly thing I call Trouble, jumped up on the swing beside me, purring. I stroked its fur, trying to find some comfort in its simple presence. "It's not over, is it, Trouble?" I whispered to the cat. "This is just the beginning, and I'm an old woman, but I don't know if I'm up for another round of secrets and lies." The phone rang, startling me. It was Michael. Grandma, the DA just called. They found something in Bethany's apartment. A burner phone. It was wiped clean, but they managed to recover some data. My heart skipped a beat. And? It's untraceable for now, but they can see it was only used to communicate with one number. The records show the phone had no other function, just calls to one number and nothing else. It's in the UK. I closed my eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. This was going to be a long and messy ordeal. I could feel it in my bones, the kind of messy where you can't trust your Zelle account, your checkbook, or even your own shadow. "Michael," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Who was Bethany working for, and what other secrets are lurking in the shadows?"